In these videos, we are going to cover the basic of YACWA's policies and procedures for keeping you and YACWA's valuable information assets safe and secure. We are going to first look at what it is that we are trying to protect, what YACWA considers to be its most valuable assets. We will then look at the threats to these assets by considering what could happen to them if these threats were to be carried out. Understanding the things that need protecting, that are of value, and the threats that they face then allows us to implement ways to protect these assets against the threats. Finally, we will be specifically looking at what you, as an employee of YACWA, can do to keep yourself and YACWA's assets safe. Now, if you think that just because you're not in the tech industry or some major company like Google that you're safe, you might be surprised to hear that in fact you are the target. Small businesses are a huge target of criminal malware attacks. The Small Business Cybersecurity Best Practice Guide indicated small businesses represented 43% of all cyber attacks last year. Small businesses are particularly vulnerable as they are less likely to implement cybersecurity measures that could help prevent and recover from ransomware, meaning the financial impact can be devastating. Cybercrime reported through the report Cyber costs small businesses on average about $9,000, medium-sized were the hardest hit with an average cost of $33,000. Generally speaking, the things we are seeking to protect involves information relating to your customers, yourself, and the information that YACWA itself produces and uses. Because of the sensitivity of the areas that YACWA operates in, the confidentiality and privacy of information about organizations and individuals that it deals with is very important. Information can be classified according to its level of sensitivity. Information that you share with the public, like brochures or material on the website, doesn't need as much protection as personal information about staff or customers, or confidential documents like contracts or policies and project documentation that you might be working on. Personal information needs to be kept private, and business information may need to be kept confidential. We also need to make sure that documents are not destroyed, accidentally changed, or lost. What we've been talking about up to now is how we try and protect information from a loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If someone gains access to your information and are able to read or share the contents of that information, you lose confidentiality. If information is corrupted, either deliberately or accidentally, it suffers a loss of integrity. And finally, if you lose access to your information, then you suffer a loss of availability. In this last category, losing the internet, for example, will mean you can't access files on Office 365. In order to protect information from loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we need to understand the threats to that information and also how those threats can exploit weaknesses in your systems or processes to bring about those losses. Threats to information can be deliberate or accidental and can come from within an organization or from threats outside. Insiders are employees, visitors, or contractors who accidentally or deliberately compromise your information in some way. For example, say you have confidential files stored on a thumb drive and you lose this and someone picks up, accesses and passes it on to the press, or someone accidentally changes a document, deleting sections without there being a backup. Outside threats are hackers or criminals who are trying to steal information or use it in order to make you pay them money. Encrypting all of your files with ransomware and demanding payment before unencrypting those files is one possible threat scenario. So how do we go about protecting information? Well, we start with a commitment to understanding the importance of the information and the people and to keeping them safe. You need to understand the details of the information that the organization has and what is valuable. From there, you can work out scenarios where this information could be accessed or tampered with inappropriately and then devise protections. Sometimes this is called controls, to prevent this from happening. Once the controls are in place, you need to train everyone so that they know what they need to do to protect that information. Finally, the organization needs to monitor how well the protections are working and update them if necessary. We're going to look at 6 different types of security controls that are going to be implemented at YACWA to protect its information. Access and passwords is one of the most important things to protect, because with this information, threat actors can potentially access all of the organization's information. Physical security is likewise important. If an unauthorized person gets access to a laptop or even a thumb drive, they may have access to sensitive information that is on it. Malware represents the most common way in which threat actors will try and gain access to information, and so it's important to understand what it is and protections against malware. This leads to safe browsing and dealing with email and messaging phishing, because this is a common way in which malware can get onto a device in the first place. Finally, backing up software provides a way of restoring information if it's corrupted or lost in any way. Your user account is yours and yours alone. If your account is logged on, then it must be you using it. The main protection to stop anyone else using your account is your password, so it's important to make it a good one. A good password is generally a long one with a mix of upper and lowercase characters with special characters and numbers mixed in. If you use a passphrase such as "We love Youth Pride Network," this is far more secure than a shorter, complicated password that you are unlikely to remember without writing it down. Once you've set your strong password, don't tell it to anyone else. Ideally, you should use a different account and password for each system, unless you're using single sign-on. In this case, if one password is compromised, it doesn't mean all of your other accounts are. Multi-factor authentication is mandatory on all accounts, and so always ensure that this is enabled. Looking at passwords in more detail, they should be at least 12 characters long. At this length, it makes it impossible even for the most sophisticated hackers to break a password encryption simply by guessing. If anyone tried, it would take nearly 34,000 years of computer time. A problem with choosing a password is that sites often require you to create the password from upper and lowercase letters, a number and a special character like an exclamation mark. It is good practice to include these variations in, even if they're not strictly necessary, and they don't add that much to the security of a long password. Although you will be using a password manager, it is convenient to use a scheme for your passwords that makes it easier to remember them yourself. Using a set phrase that varies one or more words that are connected to the site in some way is a good practice. For example, if you were choosing a password for Gmail, you might use something like 35 phish send emails, or a password for TikTok might be 35 phish shared videos. You can generally keep most of the phrase the same and just vary the words, because as long as somebody doesn't understand the scheme, it's going to be very difficult for them to guess it. A password manager is a secure way of storing usernames and passwords associated with accounts for the sites you use. They keep all of this information encrypted using a single password that you have to remember. Once encrypted, nobody else, including the developers of the password manager, can access this information that you have stored there. Password managers will remember your username and password for a site, and using plugins or extensions from browsers, you can autofill these details into login screens and forms. Password managers can be used to create passwords for you that are secure, but as I've mentioned before, sometimes it's better to create your own passphrase. Password managers can also create and manage two-factor authentication codes for accounts, which saves you having to use a separate app for this. Despite being careful, passwords are sometimes stolen, and to add another layer of protection, we use multi-factor authentication, or simply called two-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication can work in a number of different ways. The first is as a code that is sent to your phone via SMS, or a code sent via email. The code is then entered into the login when prompted. Authentication applications like Authy, Google Authenticator, or Microsoft Authenticator generate unique numbers that change every minute. These codes are entered when prompted. Office 365 will also allow push notifications that will generate a prompt on your phone to allow the login. If you're using push notification, it's really important that you don't press allow if you receive one unexpectedly. Finally, there are special USB keys that require you to insert those into your computer and touch the device to provide the second factor of authentication. Although we are focusing on digital security, it is important to remember to protect the devices themselves from inappropriate access and also to protect them from loss or damage. Keeping yourself safe should be the first priority whilst working at YACWA and also whilst thinking about information security. This means being careful about the information you reveal about yourself to others, especially on the internet. More directly, office space should be off limits to unauthorized people. Devices like phones, tablets, and laptops should be visible at all times. If leaving a computer, even for a short time, you should lock the screen. Protect your devices from accidental physical damage by using a cover or a laptop sleeve. Personal insurance or schemes like Apple Care are often worth the money, as they include fixing common problems like broken screens that would normally be expensive to do directly. If the worst happens and a device is lost or stops working, it's important to have backups so that you can restore new devices. Surfing the web exposes you to risks like exposure of sensitive personal information and infection by malware. Every time you access a website, that information is stored by your internet provider and is accessible by the government and a long list of different agencies. The sites themselves and social media companies like Facebook are also interested in tracking your every click. Generally, browsing the internet is a safe activity, but there are steps that you can take to protect yourself against tracking and accidentally downloading malware. Be especially careful when entering in confidential information such as usernames and passwords, credit card details, and other personal information. To protect yourself before you start browsing, ensure that your operating system, web browser, security software, browser plugins, and other applications are all up to date. New viruses and malware are created all the time, so updating is the main protection against this. Your browser will usually notify you when it has an update available, but you always have the option to update manually. It's also important to make sure your browser security settings are switched on, as it will provide the best protection against malicious content. Most web browsers warn you when they detect you are visiting a malicious website and whether you're possibly being exposed to malicious content. Don't ignore those warnings. If you're absolutely certain that you want to proceed, then you can override this. Most websites now use encrypted connections that have a padlock symbol next to the URL or address of the site. This isn't necessarily a safeguard that a website is legitimate, as criminals and hackers are now using encrypted connections when they create fake sites. However, if the site is not encrypted, then that should be a red flag and you should be extra cautious. You'll be able to tell because there won't be a closed padlock and the address will start with an HTTP and not HTTPS. Verifying the security of a website and its connection is especially true when entering private information like passwords, emails, and credit cards. Just because a site wants your personal details doesn't mean that you have to give them real details. So good practice is to use different usernames for each service, if they allow it, and certainly don't give your real birth date or address. Make sure you opt out of all marketing and contact options. A VPN is a way of making your computer look like it's situated in a different location and even in a different country. VPN providers do not keep logs of your activity, and so using a VPN helps protect your privacy from tracking by your internet service provider and the Australian government. A VPN does allow you to bypass restrictions that sites like Netflix impose on accessing content that is locked to a particular country. It is important to remember, though, that VPNs do not make you anonymous, and so you will still have to be careful about what details you reveal when using one. Malware comes in many forms and operates in different ways. We will cover a little of the basics about malware, but mainly concentrate on how to protect yourself against it. Different types of malware go by names such as viruses, trojans, ransomware, and rats. Their objective is to steal information by copying and uploading documents and email, spying on your activities on the computer to steal usernames and passwords, or to simply trash your computer or device by encrypting everything or simply deleting important files. Although malware is a program, they can come disguised as different types of files like documents, photos, and music. For this reason, you should treat all attachments on emails as suspicious and only open them if you are expecting them or they come from a legitimate source. The best protection against malware is to try and avoid getting it onto your computer in the first place. As with face masks and washing hands in COVID times, being careful about what you actually do with email and websites is the most important step in preventing infections. Keeping your software up to date is like being vaccinated. Computers and smartphones have protections built in, but these will only work effectively if they are up to date with the most recent versions. Phishing is a technique that cyber criminals and hackers use to trick you into clicking on an attachment or trick you into going to a fake website where they try and download malware or get you to enter your username and password for a legitimate site. Phishing is usually done through email, but instant messages can also use this technique. The email that you might receive pretends to be from a legitimate sender, but the contents will vary greatly in how they're trying to lure you to do what they want. Phishing emails come in a variety of different types and use a couple of different approaches to infecting your computer with malware or stealing information. Mass phishing campaigns involve sending phishing emails to large numbers of people and just seeing who they can catch. They might use lures that would intrigue people and trick them into clicking a link, free offers, prizes, interesting news, things of that sort. Random attacks can happen to anybody at any time. Spear phishing is where the email is sent to a specific person, sometimes with personal information that makes the email seem more genuine. Because this involves specific people and uses personal information, it is harder to do, but tends also to be more successful. Spotting this type of attack is a bit harder, but again, if the email is asking you to do something unusual, even if it seems to be from someone you know, be careful. Whaling is where the phishing email is sent to a high-value target like a CEO or finance officer. In these types of attack, the attacker often tries to convince the target that they need to make or authorize a payment. In cases where money is concerned, it is always advisable to confirm details using a phone call or other channel. So how do you tell if an email is a phish? First of all, check that the sender is known, and check also, is the email something that you would be expecting? Is it normal? Is the content of the email unusual? Does it lack personal information or contain spelling and grammar mistakes? Are link addresses to unknown or unusual sites? Are the URLs consistent with a claimed destination? Is the email asking you to log in or open an attachment or provide information? Any or all of these should be warnings about the email, and when in doubt, don't click and report the email to your IT or security officer. If something goes wrong and you lose information by accidentally deleting or changing a file, or by losing access to your computer or phone, restoring from backups is the most effective way to recover this information. Since YACWA is using Office 365, work documents and emails should be stored in the cloud, and so are effectively being backed up. Anything on your computer that is not synchronized using OneDrive will need to be backed up separately. When you create a backup, you are usually trying to back up the operating system settings, application settings and data, and documents like Word documents, photos, and music. If you do use backups, make sure that these are encrypted. This will prevent people accessing information by obtaining the backups themselves. Backups should be done daily if possible. Cloud services are a good way to back up systems and documents. Apple provides iCloud on iPhones, iPads, and Macs, This will back up your system and documents, photos, and application data. Google One works on Android devices and is similar to iCloud. It relies on Google Drive, however, for backing up documents. Other services like Google Drive for documents are OneDrive and Dropbox. This was a brief introduction to keeping you safe and protecting information that is of value to you and your organization. Much of the advice that we've given you will soon become second nature if it is not already.